Welcome, slaves, to the paycheck. This is Peter Goodall presenting another edition of Agile Project Management from my NW1 Basecamp, an A to Z for CPOs, DPOs, HPOs, and 3CPOs. Okay, let's talk about using velocity to estimate the project timeline. So once you know your velocity, you can determine how long your project will last by following these steps. Number one, add up the number of story points for the remaining requirements in the product backlog. Number two, determine the number of sprints you will need by dividing the number of story points remaining in the product backlog by the velocity. So A, to get a pessimistic estimate, use the lowest velocity the development team have accomplished. B, to get an optimistic estimate, use the highest velocity the development team have accomplished. To get a realistic estimate, use the average velocity the development team have accomplished. Number three, determine how much time it will take to complete the story points in the product backlog by multiplying sprint length by the number of remaining sprints. For example, assume that A, your remaining product backlog contains 800 story points, and B, your development team averages a velocity of 20 story points per sprint. So you divide the number of story points by your velocity and you get the remaining sprints. In this case, 800 divided by 20 equals 40. So if you're using 2-week sprints on your project will last 80 weeks. Now note, velocity, like other tools on Agile projects, is not meant to be a rigid rule to control development speed. Use velocity to measure development speed after a sprint rather than dictate how much work a Scrum team should complete before a sprint. If velocity turns into a target rather than a past measurement, Scrum teams are tempted to exaggerate estimated story points in order to meet their target, rendering velocity meaningless. Instead, focus on increasing velocity by removing constraints identified during the sprint and the sprint retrospective. Now, once the Scrum team knows its velocity and the number of story points for the requirements, you can use velocity to determine how long any given group of requirements will take to create. For example, number one, you can calculate the time an individual release may take if you have an idea of the number of story points that will go into that release. Now, at the release level, your story point estimates will be more high level than at the sprint level. If you are basing your release timing on delivering specific functionality, your release date may change as you refine your user stories and estimates throughout the project. And number two, you can calculate the time you need for a specific group of user stories, like all your high priority stories, or all the stories related to a particular theme by using the number of story points in that group of user stories. Now, velocity differs from sprint to sprint. In the first couple of sprints, when the product is new, the Scrum team will typically have a low velocity. As the project progresses, velocity should increase because the Scrum team will know more about the product and will have matured as a team working together. Setbacks within the specific sprints can temporarily decrease velocity from time to time, but Agile processes like the sprint retrospectives can help the Scrum team ensure that the setbacks are temporary. In the beginning of a project, velocity will vary considerably from sprint to sprint. It'll be more consistent over time. My quote for today: when I hear somebody say, "Oh, life is hard," I'm always tempted to ask, compared to what? I lay on my podcast for free, so if you're feeling generous, help me get up Everest. Visit www.2nh.com and help me live my dream whilst raising £250,000 for Mind and NSBCC. Signing out, this is Peter Goodall, aka the Agile Goat, and this Yogi Poo. Have a great one.